Dubai is growing faster than ever. Record population, record wealth, record construction. And on paper, it has never looked stronger. But something doesn't make sense. Because at the exact same time, thousands of the very people who built this city, teachers, engineers, nurses, mid-level professionals, are quietly leaving. Not posting about it, not making noise, just disappearing. Entire WhatsApp groups are forming around one idea: exit. So what changed? How does a city that's booming this hard start losing the people who made it work in the first place? And more importantly, why are so many of them saying they're never coming back? It didn't always look like this. For over a decade, Dubai was one of the few places in the world where the math actually worked for the global middle class. A teacher earning a few $1,000s a month could afford a decent apartment, drive a car, travel occasionally, and still save. An engineer with a young family could put their kids in international school and build a future. It wasn't about luxury, it was about balance. A rare equation where income, lifestyle, and opportunity aligned in a way that felt almost engineered. Communities like Dubai Marina, JLT, and the Greens became melting pots of cultures, where people from dozens of countries built not just careers, but lives. And that was the real promise of Dubai. Not just money, but possibility. But that promise only works as long as the numbers make sense. And at first, when things started to shift, it didn't feel like a crisis. It felt temporary. Rent ticked up, school fees crept higher. People adjusted, cut back, waited it out. But then everything changed, and the numbers stopped adding up. At first, it was just a spike. Rents jumping 20%, then 30%, then suddenly 40 or even 50% within a year. Apartments that used to cost 60,000 dirhams were being relisted at 90,000 almost overnight. But that wasn't the real problem. Because at the same time, salaries didn't move. Not up, not even slightly. And then came school fees, rising 15 to 20% year after year, quietly compounding in the background until, for many families, education alone started consuming an entire paycheck. That's when the equation broke. Housing taking up more than half of someone's income. Basic financial rules, like spending no more than 30% on rent, completely ignored by reality. And people tried to adapt. They downgraded apartments, pulled kids out of certain schools, cut travel, cut savings, cut anything that wasn't essential. But even after stripping life down to the minimum, the gap kept widening. And this is the part that didn't show up in headlines. The city was booming, profits were rising, luxury real estate was selling out in minutes, but the people holding everything together were quietly running out of room. And what made it even more unsettling was that this wasn't happening by accident. Because around 2022, something shifted, and it wasn't subtle. Dubai didn't just recover from the pandemic, it repositioned itself. Not as a global hub for the middle class, but as a magnet for the ultra-wealthy. New visa programs, aggressive real estate development, global marketing, all aligned around one goal: attract capital at the highest level. And it worked. Thousands of millionaires moved in, buying properties in cash, pushing demand into a completely different category. But what happens when a city starts optimizing for people who don't need salaries, don't rent, and don't feel price increases the same way? The entire system begins to tilt. Developers stopped building affordable units. Nearly 80% of new projects targeted the luxury segment. Rents followed the money. Prices followed the buyers. And suddenly, the city that once balanced opportunity with accessibility began drifting into something else entirely. Not broken, but recalibrated. And for the people still earning fixed incomes, still tied to monthly paychecks, still trying to make the math work, It started to feel like the rules of the game had changed in the middle of the match. And this is where things become even more complicated, because leaving isn't just a decision in Dubai, it's a risk. For most expats, the right to stay in the country is directly tied to their job. Lose your job, and suddenly you're on a 60 to 90-day countdown to leave. No long-term safety net, no unemployment cushion, no margin for negotiation. Which means asking for a raise isn't just a conversation, it's a gamble. Push too hard, and you don't just risk your income, you risk your entire life in the country. And that creates a silent pressure most people never talk about. Highly skilled professionals, engineers, teachers, healthcare workers find themselves in a position where they can't negotiate, can't push back, and can't slow down. They adapt. They absorb the cost increases. They stretch their finances further than they should, until eventually something breaks. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, internally, mathematically. And when that breaking point comes, people don't protest. They don't make headlines. They start planning their exit. And that's when the pattern starts to reveal itself, not through official data, but through behavior. Private WhatsApp groups with names like Dubai Exit Plan 2025 quietly growing from a few dozen members to thousands in just months. Conversations shifting from weekend plans to relocation strategies. Families comparing visa options, school systems, cost of living in other countries. And the most striking part is how coordinated it all feels. Like a silent understanding spreading across completely different communities at the same time. People aren't leaving because of one bad year. They're leaving because the future no longer makes sense. You see it in stories like James and Sarah, a British couple who spent nearly a decade building their life in Dubai, only to realize after 3 consecutive years of rising cost and frozen income that staying meant slowly falling behind. Or Raj, an IT engineer who gave 12 years to the city, now forced to choose between his children's education and having a place to live. Or Amelia, a nurse who worked through the pandemic, now sharing a bedroom with 2 others just to afford rent. These aren't edge cases, they're signals. And when enough of those signals align, it stops being individual decisions and starts becoming a movement. And what happens next is something no growth chart will show you. Because when these people leave, they don't just take their salaries with them, they take entire systems. Schools begin to lose experienced teachers, with turnover rates climbing past 40% a year, quietly eroding the quality parents are still paying more for. Hospitals start struggling to retain specialized staff, not because of lack of talent, but because that talent can no longer afford to live in the city it serves. Communities that once felt stable begin to fragment. Families disappear mid-school year, classrooms reshuffle, friendships reset again and again. And outside, the city keeps transforming. Familiar, affordable restaurants are replaced with high-end concepts. Neighborhoods shift from lived-in communities to curated experiences. It still looks impressive, but it starts to feel different. Less like a place to build a life, more like a place to pass through. And while Dubai continues to grow, more towers, more wealth, more headlines, something quieter is being lost underneath it all. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. And once that kind of foundation begins to erode, the question is no longer how fast a city can grow, but what it becomes when the people who held it together are no longer there. Dubai isn't collapsing. In fact, by almost every official metric, it's thriving. More money, more development, more global attention than ever before. But that's exactly what makes this story so uncomfortable, because this isn't a failure. It's a shift, a deliberate one. The city hasn't broken down. It has been recalibrated. And in that recalibration, it quietly changed who it's for. The middle-class professionals who once made Dubai feel livable are no longer the priority. They're being replaced, not suddenly, but systematically by a different kind of resident. And that creates a deeper question that goes beyond Dubai itself. Because if a city can grow while pushing out the very people who built its systems, sustained its communities, and believed in its promise, then what exactly does growth mean? And more importantly, how many other cities are heading in the same direction without anyone saying it out loud? Because once you start looking at it that way, Dubai doesn't feel like an exception anymore. It feels like a preview, a model of what happens when cities optimize for capital over continuity, for wealth over stability, for image over livability. The skyline gets taller, the headlines get louder, the numbers keep going up. But underneath, the people who make a city function, the ones who teach, treat, build, maintain, begin to disappear. And by the time it becomes visible, it's already too late. The system has adapted to a new reality, one where cities don't need to keep people, only cycle them through, where long-term belonging is replaced by temporary presence. And if that's where this is heading, then the real question isn't just why people are leaving Dubai, it's whether the idea of a livable global city is disappearing altogether.